The Traveling Salesman by Mike Minicky. Narrated by Todd. In 1969, traveling salesmen were at the peak of their career. There was a lot of money to be made by traveling across the United States selling various things. These masters of their trade would go house to house, peddling anything from books to hot new household items. There was no place in the United States that these traveling salesmen wouldn't venture in exchange for their capital gains. That was until several reports surfaced about how some of these entrepreneurs had gone missing in a certain location. Supposedly, there was a small town in the far corner of Alabama where traveling salesmen would enter only to have unspeakable things done to them before they disappeared. Many different levels of government officials, which included the FBI, had looked into the matter in an attempt to discover the truth. Whatever they had found must have been so horrendous that they had to quarantine the entire town from the public. Many years later, a few determined conspiracy theorists were somehow able to get a hold of some of these confidential files that held the key to what really happened. Unfortunately, most of the information they found in those files had been redacted, thus making it almost impossible to put the pieces of the puzzle fully together. However, one of those persistent theorists was able to come up with a possible scenario of the truth. The story you're about to hear is what that one theorist believed took place all those many years ago. The black Oldsmobile Cutlass turned off the highway into the gravel parking lot of the roadside diner. Dust, kicked up by the vehicle's tires, rained back down upon the freshly washed and waxed car. The driver's side door opened, and the song "Bad Moon Rising" by Creedence Clearwater Revival could be heard playing loudly. Daniel turned off the music and stepped out of his cherished possession and looked at the layer of gray dust now encasing it. A frown pulled at his handlebar mustache. How he hated traveling through these small, out-of-the-way towns. They were always dirty and smelled horrible. Even the people were filthy and disgusting. Nothing but a bunch of inbreeders, all of them. Pulling out a pink handkerchief from his suit's breast pocket, he began wiping the dirt off his windshield. It was a futile effort, though. All he ended up doing was smearing the glass and soiling his favorite handkerchief. The sounds of children's voices came from somewhere behind him. Daniel cringed and closed his eyes. He hated nothing more in this world than children. They were nothing but little spawns of Satan in his mind. How they were always getting into things they weren't supposed to, saying things they shouldn't be saying. Most importantly, touching things they shouldn't be touching. Daniel opened his eyes just as two young girls came running up to the Oldsmobile and started drawing figures on the dust-covered paint with their grubby little fingers. By their deep-set eyes, black hair, and narrow nose, they were clearly related. Most likely sisters, even. At that moment, he didn't care who or what they were. All he cared about was that these two little monsters were touching his brand-new car. Daniel gave his handkerchief a quick twirl, then a snap. The end of the cloth caught the girl closest to him, directly in the eye. The child immediately let out a yelp, putting a hand over the injured area. The sister, who appeared to be about a year older, squinched her nose up and let out a snarl. Unfazed at the imp's attempt at intimidation, Daniel gave another flick of his wrist. This time the end of the cloth caught the angry little child in the throat. The girl put both hands around her neck as she began coughing. "Get out of here, you little heathens!" Daniel shouted. He glared at the first girl with the injured eye before kicking her in the chest. She traveled some distance backwards from the force of the blow before falling hard to the ground. The other girl, who took the blow to the throat, had recovered quickly and grabbed her sister off the gravel. They gave one last glare at him before running away. A grin spread across Daniel's round face. The feeling of disciplining those that deserved it was the reason he chose his current profession. Walking around to the back of the Oldsmobile, he popped the trunk and grabbed a large briefcase out of the back, then headed into the small diner. The bell above the door gave a small ding noise as Daniel entered. The inside of the diner looked practically identical to all the other shithole, choke, and pukes he had stopped to eat at in the last 2 months. Although he had to admit this one was in a little better shape. At least the seats at the booths that lined the walls were clean, without any tears. To his further surprise, the breakfast bar was well stocked with condiments and gave off a very welcoming vibe. A woman, who appeared to be in her mid-40s, came out of the back kitchen to greet him. Daniel gave her a quick once-over, as he did with any woman he found attractive. She was wearing a long brown pleated skirt that went all the way down to her ankles. The blouse she had on was pink, short-sleeved, and form-fitting. So much so that his eyes fixated on that area the longest. He licked his lips as he imagined what those large breasts of hers would look like once they were freed from their restraints. "Please take a seat anywhere, and I'll be right with you," the woman, Patty, according to her name tag, said, motioning to all the available space, which was the entire restaurant, since there were no other patrons present. Daniel grabbed the brim of his hat and tipped it slightly before making his way to the breakfast bar. When he wasn't looking, Patty rolled her eyes at his pathetic attempt at manners. She had seen the vulgar look in his eyes when he ogled her. After taking a seat, Daniel put his briefcase and hat on the counter. Patty handed him a menu before heading back into the kitchen. Daniel groaned as he saw the list of options to choose from. Every place he has stopped at so far served the same thing: bacon, eggs, and grits. How he hated the South. There was no imagination of flavors in these hillbilly shitholes. Patty returned, pulling out a notepad and pen. "What will you have?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe the only thing you have on this menu?" Daniel replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Patty gave a tight-lipped smile before calling out the order to the back. Grabbing a fresh pot of coffee, she brought it over to fill his cup. As she poured the dark liquid, she handed him that morning's newspaper. Daniel reached up, but instead of taking the paper, he gently caressed her arm. Patty immediately jerked away, causing some of the coffee to splash on his briefcase. "Hey, watch what the hell you're doing," Daniel snapped. He grabbed his briefcase and set it on the bar stool next to him. Clicking the 2 tabs, the case popped open, and he inspected the items within. Nothing appeared to be damaged. He let out a sigh of relief. After closing it back up, he glared at her. "If you would have damaged any of those Bibles inside my case, you would have had to pay for them." "You are a Bible salesman?" Patty asked. By the sound of her voice, it was clear that she didn't believe he matched the profession. "Yes, I sell Bibles, so uneducated backwoods folks like you can better learn about your sins." Daniel spoke slowly, believing that she was too dense to understand what he was saying without breaking it down. "Now, how much longer on my food? I don't want to be in this hole in the world any longer than I have to." Patty's brow tightened, then stormed off back into the kitchen. As angry as Daniel was at her carelessness, it didn't stop him from zeroing in on her backside as she departed. The bell above the front entrance dinged, and a woman wearing a long black dress with a large red belt walked in. The first thing Daniel noticed was how well this dress showed off her voluptuous curves. Moving his gaze upward, he was taken aback at how beautiful her delicate features were. She was absolutely stunning with her wavy black hair and full lips. The woman gave a quick glance around the diner before settling her gaze upon Daniel. There was a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth as she gave him a once-over of her own. It was as if she approved of what she saw. Without waiting to be invited, she made her way over to him and sat down. Daniel did a quick swipe with his hand across his balding head to make sure that his comb-over was still in place. "Hello, my name is Daniel Burton. May I have the pleasure of knowing yours, my fair lady?" "Latricia Mactens," she replied, extending her hand. Daniel gently grabbed it by the fingertips and brought them to his lips. "Oh my, you are a true gentleman." "Well, I really don't know about that, but I do know how to properly treat a lady," Daniel replied seductively, as the scent of wildflowers coming from her stimulated him. When he took a moment to look at her, he couldn't help but feel a familiarity of sorts, both from her name and looks. Patty exited the kitchen carrying a plate of food. She placed it in front of Daniel without even bothering to look at him. She did, however, look at the woman sitting next to him. A warm smile found its way onto Patty's face before she leaned over the counter and kissed the woman on the cheek. That's when it hit Daniel why the woman looked so familiar. She looked just like Patty, except younger than the waitress. "Hey, Latricia, Sarah and Lacey are already outside waiting. Again, thank you so much for coming by and picking them up while I work late tonight," Patty said, pouring a cup of coffee and placing it in front of Latricia. There was a quick exchange of looks between the two women before Patty continued, "It seems that Lacey has already hurt her eye somehow." "Please," Latricia waved her hand in a dismissing gesture. "You don't ever have to thank me for picking up my nieces. I love playing with them. Besides, we are a family. We help each other when they need it." Daniel sat there quietly eating his breakfast. He no longer felt like conversing with Latricia, now that he knew she and Patty were related. He had made the mistake of getting involved with sisters once before, and it didn't end well for him. Not to mention the two little girls he hit earlier were Patty's daughters. When the waitress mentioned Lacey's injured eye, he almost choked on his food. Lucky for him, the brat apparently didn't tell her mother how she had gotten hurt. The last thing he needed was a crazy redneck woman coming after him for properly disciplining her child. The bell of the front door dinged yet again. Daniel looked over to see that Latricia had left and Patty was wiping down the already spotless counter. Not wanting to stick around any longer, he pulled some money out of his wallet and threw it on the counter next to the barely touched plate of food. Grabbing his briefcase, he took his leave, making sure he didn't make eye contact with Patty on the way out. Once outside, Daniel quickly made his way to the car and grabbed the door handle. He jerked his hand away immediately after feeling something very sticky. Looking down at his palm, he found parts of a spider web all over it. "Ugh," Daniel grunted, wiping the sticky strands on his slacks. One thing he hated more than kids was spiders. Anything with an exoskeleton creeped him out to no ends. It wasn't just the look and feel of the hard exteriors, but the sound some of them made when moving. I can't wait to get the fuck out of this place. The Crash. Daniel cranked up the music as he cruised down the two-lane country road. He found it a little ironic that the song that was playing was Honky Tonk Women by the Rolling Stones. This was because every house he had stopped at since leaving the diner a couple of hours ago, he was greeted by only women. Not once did the man of the house appear. Although he found it a little strange not seeing any men around, he was more than happy to pitch his Bible-selling spiel to the women. Daniel had always found it easier to push the Lord's words unto them rather than men. They were more docile and caring than their male counterparts. Daniel felt something on his cheek and reached up to wipe it away. It was thin and sticky to the touch. Looking down, he saw it was more strands from a spider's web. What the hell? He tilted the rearview mirror down so he could see if the owner of the web was on him. Seeing nothing, he felt his muscles relax. As he tilted the mirror back into place, a black spider crawled out from behind it and onto his finger. Daniel slammed his hand against the passenger seat in an attempt to kill the blasted thing. The blow did succeed in knocking the arachnid off him, but only for it to scurry away. Just as the spider crawled over the edge of the seat, he saw the red hourglass shape on its abdomen. Before Daniel could react, black widow spiders started pouring out of the air vents like an overflowing river. Within seconds, his body was covered with the deadly arachnids. Adrenaline pumped through him as he furiously beat at his tiny assailants. Unfortunately, while defending himself, Daniel made two very serious mistakes. First, he stepped hard on the gas pedal instead of the brake, which caused the Oldsmobile to lurch forward at a high speed. Second was he had taken both his hands off the steering wheel. Daniel didn't realize his error until he saw the hood of the car raise up in the air as the vehicle was launched off the embankment. By then, it was too late. For a brief second, it appeared as if everything had become suspended in time. Daniel saw pieces of trash and even a few black widow spiders floating in the air before him. Then everything sped up as the Oldsmobile began tumbling down a grassy hill. Glass from the windows and windshield shattered, showering the interior with their razor-sharp edges. Daniel closed his eyes and held on for dear life. Finally, the car did one last flip before landing on its wheels. Opening his eyes, he briefly saw he was in a small clearing before everything went dark. Daniel's eyelids twitched involuntarily until one of them opened all the way. At first, everything was a complete blur. It wasn't until the second eyelid opened that his vision started to come into focus. Daniel's mind tried to register what he was seeing. There was both fresh and dried blood all over his pants. As if on cue, searing pain tore through his head, causing him to cry out. Then it all came rushing back to him what had happened. He put a hand to the side of his face where it hurt the most and instantly regretted it. There were tiny shards of sharp glass embedded in his palms, and when he brushed it against his skin, he created more painful lesions. From the passenger seat, Daniel grabbed the rearview mirror, which must have broken off when the windshield shattered. With unsteady hands, he held it up to see how badly he was hurt. There were several superficial cuts all over him, but it was a large, nasty gash on the top left side of his head that had him concerned. By the looks of it, it would definitely need stitches. The last time he remembered seeing a payphone was back at the diner, which was miles away and too far for him to walk in his condition. That meant he needed to find a nearby home and hope that they had a phone he could use. Opening the car door, Daniel climbed out only to fall to the ground as a jolting pain pulsed through his leg. Looking at his calf, he saw that his pant leg had been torn, exposing another nasty cut. This one was about 6 inches long. God, please give me a break. After some struggle, Daniel was able to get to his feet and maintain his balance. He made his way back to the road by following the trail of damage the car had caused during its roll. Since he had been traveling west before he wrecked, he decided to keep to that course. It had only been about 10 minutes when Daniel saw the smoke coming from a chimney nearby. He almost cried out with joy at finally having some luck. Pushing past the dizziness and nausea, he limped as fast as he could towards what was probably his only chance at getting help. Drenched in sweat and laboriously breathing, Daniel climbed the wooden steps under the porch. He felt like he might faint as he pounded on the front door, but somehow managed to hold it together. Footsteps could be heard as someone approached the door from the other side. This was followed by the sound of locks being unlocked. Finally, the door swung open. "Latricia?" Daniel breathed in shock. Then he collapsed to the floor unconscious. "Welcome to my parlor." Daniel felt something warm on his face. Slowly opening his eyes, he found the rays of the morning sun coming through the window near the bed he was lying in. The heat from those wonderful beams caressed him like a mother caring for a child. It made him want to stay right where he was forever. Letting out a giant yawn, he stretched his arms out wide. The movement caused a tearing pain along his ribs on the left side, reminding him that he was hurt. It also reminded him where he was. Daniel remembered everything all the way up to when Latricia had opened the door. After that, he must have passed out. That meant he was still probably at her house. Looking around the room, he found it to be very plain. There were only a few pieces of worn-down furniture here and there. No pictures adorned the walls or dresser. There was, however, a lot of cobwebs hanging from all the ceilings in all four corners. The spiders. Chills ran down his spine as images of the eight-legged demons flooding inside the car came rushing back to him. He gave his head a shake as if the action would somehow magically get the Black Widows out of his mind. All it did was intensify the ache that was already there from his head wound. Carefully touching his injury, he found it to be bandaged up. Curious, he removed the thick quilted blankets to check his leg. His eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets when he saw that he had been stripped completely naked. What the hell? There came a knock at the door. Daniel quickly put the blanket back over himself as he saw the round doorknob being turned. As the door opened, Latricia peeked her head inside. "Good, you're awake," she said with a smile. Then she opened the door the rest of the way and came to sit beside him on the bed. "Now, let me take a look at that nasty head wound." Daniel didn't dare to say or do anything as she started removing the bandage. He was too embarrassed, knowing that the only thing separating his naked body from her was a blanket. It looks like my sister Samantha did a good job stitching you up," Latricia observed. There was a sound of pride in her voice as she complimented her sister's handiwork. "Another sister?" Daniel asked, temporarily forgetting his concern about his lack of attire. "Yes, I come from a very large family with many sisters. We all have lived in this small town our entire lives," she replied, putting the bandage neatly back in place. "Only Samantha has traveled outside our borders, which is lucky for you since she learned the art of medicine during those travels. She's the one that sewed you up and applied healing ointments to prevent infection." Daniel didn't know what to make of all of this. He did have to admit that he was glad that his wounds were treated in time, even if it had been done by a woman. "Please, tell your sister thank you for me," Daniel offered. The expression of gratitude came out strained, almost as if saying something nice had never crossed his lips before. "You can tell her yourself, since she will be back here tomorrow for our family celebration. For right now, let's check your other injury." Before Daniel could stop her, Latricia ripped the blanket completely off him. His face turned beet red as he cupped his hands over his exposed groin. A smile tugged at her lips in amusement at his modesty. Latricia inspected the wound on his leg. She once again nodded in approval at her sister's handiwork. Then, much to Daniel's relief, she put the blanket carefully back over him. "I will have my sister Amanda bring you some breakfast. After you eat, please get some rest. You need to heal before putting any weight on that leg, or you could risk causing more harm." Without another word, Latricia left, closing the door behind her. After she was gone, Daniel entertained the idea of getting dressed and leaving. He really needed to go check on his car and then go see a real physician. He scanned the room for his clothes, but there was no sign of them. Damn, they must have taken them to clean. Of course, it didn't really matter, because as soon as he tried to move his leg, electrical pain ran up the limb, reminding him that he was in no condition to go anywhere. Sighing in resignation, he leaned back and closed his eyes to rest. It wasn't long before a young girl of about 17 years of age entered, carrying a tray with a plate full of food on it. To Daniel's delight, the breakfast he was being served was finally worth eating. There was cooked ham, eggs, and bacon that made his mouth water just from the smell. On the side was a small plate of golden hash browns and 2 pancakes. Finally, there was a bowl filled with various chopped fruit. Everything looked so amazing that his ravenous stomach growled so loudly that it startled the young girl. She recovered quickly and laid a handmade napkin across his lap. After making sure he was comfortable, she excused herself. Daniel couldn't believe his luck right now. Sure, he almost died the day before, but now he was living large with beautiful women waiting on him hand and foot, while feeding him a feast made for a king. The Lord does work in mysterious ways. For the first time since he could remember, he clapped his hands together and thanked God for blessing him. Then he eagerly grabbed the knife and fork. Taking a deep whiff of the intoxicating aroma, he dug in. The flavors exploded in his mouth as he cherished each bite. The rest of the day proceeded in similar fashion. He was checked on every couple of hours by different girls. They changed his chamber pot, fluffed his pillows, brought him meals, and even gave him some reading material to pass the time. The only time things got really uncomfortable was around dusk, when Amanda entered, followed by 2 younger girls. One of them was wearing an eye patch. Daniel instantly recognized them as the 2 girls from the diner. By the looks on their faces, they also recognized him. Outwardly, he appeared calm as if nothing was wrong. Inwardly, his heart thundered against his ribcage at the fear of being outed. Once again, the girls said nothing. They just glared at him until Amanda finished with her assignment and ushered them out. "That was too close. I can't stay here." Daniel wiped the sweat off his brow with the back of his hand. "But how? They have my clothes, which means that I'm basically their hostage for now." He struck the bed several times with his fist, angered by his stupidity for wrecking his car and ending up here. A knock came at the door before Latricia entered, wearing a long black nightgown. Behind her came 2 girls Daniel hadn't seen before. One was carrying a bucket of what he assumed was hot water because of the steam it was producing. The second girl was carrying fresh towels and washcloths. These items were placed next to the bed, as instructed by Latricia. After the girls took their leave, Latricia grabbed one of the washcloths and placed it in the hot water. As she let the cloth soak, she pulled the blanket off of Daniel, once again exposing his naked form. "What are you doing?" he demanded, as he pulled the blanket back over his body. "Giving you your bath, of course," she replied casually, as if bathing a naked stranger was completely normal. I, he stammered, desperately trying to think of a way out of this situation. Latricia cut him short, as she slapped his hand away and ripped the blanket completely off the bed, tossing it in the corner. "Your wounds need to be cleaned, and as our guest, it is our duty to assist you," she said sternly. She gave him a look that indicated she wouldn't tolerate anything but his acceptance. Reluctantly, Daniel gave in, knowing it was no use to say or do anything else. Satisfied that she had made her point, Latricia grabbed the washcloth out of the steaming water and wrung it out. She then methodically started bathing him, beginning with his head wound. She was very gentle, especially around the injuries, as to avoid causing him any further discomfort. Daniel felt the tightness of his taut muscles relax under her care. His eyes closed and his breathing normalized. This is what it must be like to have a wife. This invading thought surprised him. He had never entertained the idea of marriage before, mostly because he hated kids with a passion. That, and also because he didn't want to have to take care of anyone other than himself. Now, seeing how well Latricia was taking care of him, he realized he may have been wrong all this time. Daniel's eyes shot wide open as he felt Latricia begin washing his privates. His pulse quickened as he grew aroused. He tried thinking of everything from baseball to football to get his mind off what was happening, but nothing he tried seemed to work. Eventually, he gave in and stopped fighting his body's natural response. Latricia gave him a mischievous smile, then stood up and slid her nightgown off her delicate shoulders. It fell to the ground, leaving her completely exposed for Daniel to see. He sucked in a deep breath as he admired her beauty. She was flawless, all except for an oddly shaped reddish birthmark around her navel. Latricia put one knee on the side of the bed, then brought the other knee over to straddle him. The next few moments were brief, but very intense, leaving Daniel exhausted. As he struggled to keep his eyes open, he watched Latricia put her robe back on. She then grabbed the blanket from the corner and covered him up. "Get some rest. You have a big day tomorrow. All my sisters will be here for the celebration, with you being our guest of honor." Daniel didn't know what she was talking about, nor did he care at the moment. All he cared about was getting some much-earned sleep. The feast. Daniel's deep sleep was interrupted by the feeling of being dragged over what felt like rocks and tree roots. He tried opening his eyes to see what was happening, but something sticky wouldn't allow them to open fully. All he could see was a blurry, bright light. When he tried to wipe his face, he found that he couldn't move his arms either. Something had his entire body bound so tight that no movement could be made except for the rise and fall of his chest. Even then, he found it hard to breathe. No air could be received through his nose. Only his mouth was clear of obstruction. "What is going on?" he demanded, his voice tremored with fear as he spoke. The only response Daniel got was the sound of children's laughter in the distance. This only heightened his unease, and he felt his bladder release. As he felt the warm liquid spread, he mustered all the strength he could to try and break free of his bonds. It was no use. He was trapped. Suddenly, the feeling of being dragged had stopped, only to be replaced by the feeling of being lifted up in the air by his head and back. Once he was in what he believed to be a standing position, everything stopped. "Please, someone please tell me what is happening," Daniel pleaded. A delicate, feminine hand brushed his eyes, and the sticky substance practically melted away under the touch. When Daniel's eyes finally adjusted to the light, he found himself staring right in the face of Patty. Her visage was neutral, lacking any emotions. She reached up and brushed his face a couple of more times. White strains that looked like cotton candy fell away easily with each pass. Daniel gulped down as much air as he could when his nose and mouth were completely free of whatever had been on him. Once he was satisfied that he wouldn't suffocate to death, he looked around. What he saw made him wish he had stayed blinded. There were several women and children, clearly related, forming a circle around him, all with dead expressions. But that wasn't what truly terrified him. He now knew why he couldn't move any part of his body. He was fully wrapped up like a mummy in that white cotton candy-looking substance, which had now become part of a gigantic spider web that had been spun between two towering maple trees. Daniel's mind screamed. This was all just a bad dream, a nightmare brought on by the Black Widow spiders that had caused him to wreck his car. All he needed to do was wake up and everything would be all right. Hell, I'm probably not even in this place at all. Yeah, that's it. I'm probably just passed out after a night of drinking at one of those shitty bars I stopped at. I know what you're thinking, but you are not dreaming, Latricia assured him as she came around from behind one of the trees to join her sister in front of him. What is this? Daniel asked, while wondering if the woman he had sex with last night was a real live witch. This is a celebration, of course. A woman that looked exactly like Latricia, except just a little older, came around to stand beside both Latricia and Patty. Who are you? Daniel demanded. Forgive me. I am Samantha. I'm the one who attended your wounds and prevented you from dying, Samantha replied with a curtsy. Daniel could tell by the way Samantha moved and spoke that she was definitely much more worldly and sophisticated than her sisters. None of that mattered right now, however. All he cared about right now was what these bitches were going to do to him. As soon as that thought crossed his mind, Samantha's lips curled up in a knowing smile. You are here as a special guest for tonight's celebration, Samantha continued. A celebration of the soon-to-be new additions to the Mactons family. Daniel's brow knitted in confusion. This only caused Samantha's smile to grow. She then placed her hand on Latricia's abdomen. Because of you, Daniel, there is now life growing within my sister. Even now I can feel them moving inside. Impossible, Daniel whispered in disbelief. Oh, it is indeed possible. Life has been created, I assure you, Samantha replied, walking over to stand directly in front of him. Without taking her eyes off his, she called out, Lacey, please come here. Bodies parted, opening a path in the ring. Young Lacey, still wearing an eye patch, slowly made her way to Samantha's side. Daniel found it hard to swallow as the little girl glared at him. Samantha removed the eye patch from Lacey's head to reveal a cold, black, bulbous orb with a deep gash in it. Daniel felt his gag reflex activate at the mere sight of the alien-looking sphere. Unable to hold it back, vomit shot forth, spraying several of those before him, including Samantha and Lacey. Anger quickly replaced the smile on the older sister's face as she wiped away the spittle with the sleeve of her dress. Since Lacey is the one you marred with your stupidity, she will have the pleasure of the first bite, Samantha said, gently pushing the little girl forward. Lacey lifted her arms out wide as she threw her head back. The air was filled with her screams as long black spider legs erupted out of the flesh of her back. Skin tore apart, forming a line down her skull and face. As chunks of flesh fell away, several arachnid eyes appeared. Daniel could only watch in horror as the little girl's human form melted away, giving birth to an abnormally large spider. Once the transition was complete, the abomination reared up on 4 of its 8 legs, exposing the red hourglass on the beast's hard abdomen. That's why the name was familiar. Latricia Mactons. Latrodectus Mactons, also known as the Southern Black Widow. Daniel wanted to kick himself for not seeing all the signs. Now, however, it no longer mattered. At that moment, the Black Widow spider that had been Lacey leaped forward, landing on top of him. The very first thing she began eating were his eyes. Daniel's screams were soon suffocated by the blood pouring down his throat. The agony that coursed through him lasted only seconds before his entire world went black. The end.